This week, Lisa O'Connor, Director of Global Security Research and Development at Accenture Labs, joins us for our feature interview. I'm going to get this name probably wrong. Eyal Nimani of Javelin Networks will join us for a technical segment on bypassing two-factor authentication. And in the news this week, new Windows evasion techniques, naked rowers, undetectable malware, social engineering from your shed, and banking apps vulnerable to man-in-the-middle attacks. All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly. I'm, of course, your host, Paul Asadorian, excited to be here, as always, on Paul's Security Weekly.
Hi, and welcome to the show. I totally introduced our host right now, but I've got a total awkward boner.
What? Where? Oh, hey! I'm in the studio with you guys. That's kind of cool.
Sounds like a plan.
And we'll at least have one person listening.
That's right. Just saying.
Yeah, I know, and I appreciate it, and I'm glad you enjoyed your spooning with Jeff. But
Hey, that
Actually built a new office.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, third baby on the way, so I needed a new office.
Nice.
I lost my old office. That's now the baby room.
Brought to you by... Has your network been breached? Cybereason can help you answer this question. Cybereason products hunt for threats within your network and eliminate them in real time. To Cybereason, real time means within seconds. Founded by former military hackers who don't play by the rules, they've built this experience into their platform. Harness ingenuity and imagination, not just code, to defeat attackers. Cybereason, disrupt the adversary and let the hunt begin. Endgame automates the hunt for both known and never-before-seen adversaries in enterprise networks. Built on unique knowledge on the adversary's tools, techniques, and tactics, Endgame's centrally managed agent prevents, detects, and responds to advanced adversaries in the earliest stages of the kill chain without prior knowledge. Endgame, automate the hunt. The average time between being hacked and realizing you've been hacked is 1 year. Can you afford to let an intruder roam your network for that long? Can your company weather the fallout when this comes to light? Black Hills Information Security can find the bad guys in your network and train you to do it yourself. Email consulting@blackhillsinfosec.com to find out how a hunt teaming engagement can help you find a persistent threat in your network.
And welcome to the show. But first, let me introduce you to a man for which I have no witty intro this week, Mr. Paul Asadorian.
Welcome, everyone, to this episode of Paul Security Weekly. It's actually episode 539. Did I get that right? It is 539, yes.
It is, yeah.
539. It is December 7th, 2017. Excited to be here, as always. It looks like, as far as Security Weekly hosts go, Larry Pesce is here.
Yeah, that's
to
it.
my left.
Yeah,
And we
I
just,
am definitely here to your left.
And we did a webcast together where you were also to my left.
Yeah, and if you go far enough around, I'm to your right.
That's right. It's true. This is true. It's good to be here. I'm really liking the... we made like subtle changes to the studio.
Yeah.
And I really like the way that it...
I think the big one is the lighting. It's not so subtle from that end, but...
Yeah, it's pretty bright. Yeah.
Yeah, I had to do like this to figure out which camera I needed to look at. And
it's
we
great.
Figured out now.
It's great. Yeah. Always making changes here in the studio. It's wonderful.
Yeah, it's very dynamic. Every week something's different.
Absolutely. A couple of quick announcements. Make sure you do a couple things for us. Subscribe to our mailing list, securityweekly.com/insider. We'll give you exclusive updates and invite you to our webcast program, where next year we'll have 2 webcast programs. One will be the webcast that you know and love and enjoy today. A new one will be the on-demand webcast series. We've got wonderful content planned out for you. We're going to do one on penetration testing and security training and education, endpoint detection and response. So kind of a different look on our webcast series. So you're going to want to make sure that you subscribe to our mailing list to get all of the updates. The Pony Express webcast today was just phenomenal. I had so much fun. They actually dropped off a sensor in our office and monitored the wireless spectrums. It was really cool. Told me about some stuff that I didn't know about. So it was good. securityweekly.com/subscribe. Also is where you can go to subscribe to all of our other shows, such as Enterprise Security Weekly, Startup Security Weekly, Hack Naked News, Secure Digital Life. What am I forgetting? Tradecraft, Security Weekly.
Yep.
in a new show that I'm not ready to announce, but in all likelihood, we have verbal commitments to have a new show on the network on a different take on the topic of the normal shows that we have. It's different. It's different enough where I'm like, okay, we can have.
We can spin that.
We can have one more show.
Nice.
Yeah. For now, maybe more to follow, but at least we have that one covered. And
Yep. And you and I should talk about 2 individual shows that maybe don't fit into any one of those particular categories. But we can talk about that offline. Just a sort of a one-off kind of fun type of thing.
Oh yeah. So. Oh, and some of our webcasts are now available on demand. This is really new. I just built the webpage the other day. securityweekly.com/on demand. If you missed a webcast, you can go there, register for it, and consume that content. So there's 3 or 4 webcasts up there today. Make sure you go check them out. securityweekly.com/on demand. Our guest for this evening is Lisa O'Connor. Again, the Global Security Research and Development Director at Accenture Labs. In this role, she curates and manages a portfolio of cyber research, including threat intelligence, advanced cyber hunting, orchestration for resilient cyber architecture, edge analytics, and machine learning, active defense, and the security of industrial Internet of Things. Lisa, welcome to the program today.
Thank you very much. It's really fun to be here.
Yes, I'm glad you could join us. Lisa, how did you get your start in information security?
It was a really short experience with the space industry. And I actually started out at Fairchild Space Company, was a parts engineer looking at stuff for a while, and I thought, I have to do something much more fun, and then transitioned over to cybersecurity. So I actually got my start at the National Security Agency.
Very nice, very nice. And now how did you come to be in your role today at Accenture?
So it's been a really fun journey. So I did get about 10 years in at the National Security Agency, really moving around and getting my experiences as an InfoSec engineer and a cryptologic engineer. And then I moved on into private industry as we started to see more exciting things really taking root in private industry. And that was the time when there was lots of good R&D investment out for the private sector and financial services and others. So I went into consulting. And then I worked for some financial services organizations and then back to consulting as I really enjoyed that and the challenge of it and really helping out and transforming customers. So I'm here at Accenture where I started in the consulting practice, but now am in my happy place working for Accenture Labs.
And one of the things you're looking at in Accenture Labs, Lisa, is advanced security analytics. And many vendors, and I think even those in the security community, will use the terms AI and machine learning. And I think a lot of it is just words. And I don't think it means what we think it means. So how can we use these techniques in security effectively?
Yeah, it's as you walk the floor at RSA, I think you can play a bingo game for the different companies that espouse AI or machine learning or natural language processing. So it is very important to be really clear about what you're doing and what things are being invoked. We do have a big focus on artificial intelligence and in using that and really taking a different look at data sets through AI, and that's the methods, whether those are supervised or unsupervised methods, for looking at data and interpreting it and getting different insights. And as I said, some of those are supervised, some of those are unsupervised. But what we find is that there's probably a good cause to back up even further and look at the quality of those data sets that you are going to train against. So we use AI in a number of our projects. We use it in our analytics and our advanced analytics to hunt for things or patterns that we may not have thought about, as a human being or eyes on glass, to look at, yet it may be something that from a data science perspective pops out. And again, those are insights that you can achieve through AI. And we also use machine learning and natural language processing in one of our other projects, research projects, which is really exciting. And it's looking at data protection at scale. And this is a big challenge for the industry. So we have large organizations, global organizations that are doubling their data stores every year, and yet they don't know the value of what they have to protect or what's hiding in that data that's actually sensitive. So
Lisa,
being able to look at,
I'm sorry. So I want just go back to the AI because you said something that was interesting. You said there were supervised and unsupervised use cases for AI. Could you give us some examples as to why you would use one or the other?
Yeah, so supervised use cases are where you actually want researcher or human intervention to actually guide the models, because you may see the models doing something, or the feature set that you're pulling in and doing that learning on, you may see it going off in a direction that you know is not the correct direction, or it's picking up on different insights that you might not want, in the sense of you may want to focus in other areas for your piece of learning. So it's a way of steering the model a little bit in terms of being able to really tune what it's focused on and what it's going after. And unsupervised, of course, now you're sort of taking your hands proverbially off the wheel, and you're letting the algorithms and the real math crank out and potentially go to a place that may be different insights than you ever would have arrived at if you were steering the model.
I think a lot of security professionals today lump AI into automation, and they're very afraid of the word automation because I think largely they've been burned by it in the past. What's your advice for those that are looking at AI and automation and are very scared of it as kind of like trying to replace you as a person in the enterprise?
Yeah, AI, a lot of folks are concerned about that because they're looking at sort of the human factor of, did we just hand off the thinking and the jobs and roles? And I think there are things that will be handed off, that if it's something a human can interpret and do quickly, chances are AI can do it just as well very fast. And of course, you're talking now at machine speeds. So one of the challenges that we have is being able to respond in a timely fashion. And you know that from a threat perspective, it's how do you keep up with the volume and the speed of what's going on, and how do you interpret it to get to the most important results quickly? So you need something helping you, and that can be AI helping you, or that can be automation of processes that you've already put in place. So we get really excited about automation and orchestration, and we have some, many products now on the market showing maturity in that area. But I think one of the challenges is having sort of a uniform definition of what do we mean in orchestrating an outcome. So if we said block something, what does that mean? And is that the same thing across a product set, or does it have a different impact? So there's an industry-wide taxonomy challenge there that we certainly need to decide as an industry of how much we want to be interlocked in that. But the orchestration is something that gets us to those meaningful actions and outcomes.
I tend to think of it sort of like Star Trek, and in many of the Star Trek series, there's at least one crew member who's an artificially intelligent being. And that's just one crew member out of the however many crew members are there. And in that artificially intelligent crew member is guided by the actual humans, very much so as the computer. As you said, you run the model, but then they rerun the model based on human input. And I think is that more of how we should be thinking of it, is that it's human guided artificial intelligence?
Absolutely. And even in whether it's AI or we're talking about orchestration where people are afraid to let the machines execute a process, that's based on the humans defining and honing that process and carefully providing the parameters under which we're comfortable with that thing running and automating a function, or helping us prioritize what events to respond to. So I think it probably goes back to a sort of a test of our operational rigor and have we defined those things properly to be able to step back and let them run.
Do you think enterprises are implementing this today, and what percentage, and how will we see the growth in our industry embrace some of this newer technology and processes of security orchestration and automation?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of companies that are looking at orchestration, certainly if you think about security operations, but also in normal business processes. So you'll see a lot of folks embracing the orchestration within ServiceNow. And we do a whole set of services at Accenture around identity and access management, and what we call it is robotic process automation. So it's all those very structured functions that we know you have to get through for provisioning people, identity, access to assets, all that stuff. That those lend themselves very well because they're very precisely defined tasks to automation. And then with that robotics process automation, you start to get the speed of provisioning, which again, that's a high bandwidth, high people intensive effort that now you can really transform that into a very automated process with people, of course, guiding it and monitoring it.
Yeah, I think it's a very labor-intensive task to identify where your sensitive data is and who should have access to it, as you described in IAM. What are some tips that you have for folks that haven't embraced that technology or process in overcoming some of that enormous kind of effort in that foundational element that we talk about, that I feel like no one's listening, that you need to define where your data is and who has access to it and then manage that process?
Yeah, well, we know where all our assets are and all our data is, right?
Right.
Of course, clearly, yes.
Every large global organization does. Yeah, it's a real challenge, and doing asset management well, and I consider data an asset. Users are assets, computers, everything else that we think about traditionally in IT asset management. But knowing where that stuff is and the value of it is key. And so you have to look for tools that are going to help you do that to be able to prioritize how you're delivering security. Where are you spending for protections? Where are you not worried about things? So starting, again, you're going to pick your most sensitive things or sensitive areas to try to go after and understand. And there are a number of techniques and tools that are out there on the market that can help you find that data. One of the research projects that we're doing actually is looking at the unstructured part of that. So not just wonderful structured data and text searches, but we're doing it using mathematical models, and we're doing it to a relative near Gaussian centrality to be able to say, oh, I could train on a set of data and I can go find more like it. And then that starts to tell me, no matter how bad my labeling was, or where people copied the data, or where they moved it, or where it migrated to, I can identify it if I can go crawl that space and find out what's there.
Does threat modeling play into that exercise at all, Lisa?
Absolutely. So you had the pleasure of speaking with Tom Parker, my colleague who does the adversarial threat simulations, and it's so important to understand what you're up against and who's interested in your data, your people, your processes, and that ranges from nation state all the way down to protests or other nuisance things like kids hacking, 14-year-old kids hacking in their basement. But the more again, one of the things I think we're experiencing now is we have some very powerful tools out there. But it's very important to understand who that threat actor is and what they're doing. One of the other acquisitions we made that we're so excited about was iDefense. And iDefense really completes a picture of looking at the threat actors, understanding the marketplace, what they're doing, what they're selling, what's viable. And again, that intelligence helps you decide what do you have to respond to? What's a real threat, or what's something that you can quarantine and watch?
Does iDefense still make that correlation between the threats that are out there and what you have in your environment? I speak with a lot of organizations that are tackling the vulnerability management problem, and they're like, well, I can get a pretty good sense of what I have. I just want to know what might be vulnerable and then what might most likely be attacked. Is that still a valid strategy in the market today?
Yeah, I believe it is. Because again, it's bringing it home. I may know what the threat actor is doing, but I have to know what's targeted in my infrastructure to know where that's going to manifest. So what kinds of things, what types of exploits or behavior would you look for? What's that connection to, again, the monitoring inside? So what are you seeing in your SOC?
You mentioned data protection at scale, and I think as we spoke previously, Lisa, we generate more data than ever before about a lot of things, in our own IT systems, about ourselves. How do we first know what's sensitive, and how do we protect what's sensitive?
Yeah, so part of that, depending on what industry you're in, will be dictated, right? So obviously healthcare, HIPAA, financial services, some of those are very highly defined of what are those types of information. What's probably more subtle are things like merger and acquisition data, which has a life cycle on it, which for a period of time may be sensitive, but isn't something that would naturally, trip necessarily a data classification policy. You'd really have to explicitly know. So I think the big thing is being able to contextualize sensitive data in a way that you can go search for it. So again, those training models are understanding what it is, and then being able to go out and understand that. One of the things that we found that was really interesting is if you look at how data is labeled, there's a way within Microsoft Office of being able to identify country of origin. And as it turns out, lots of things happen to originate from Afghanistan because nobody changes the setting, and it just happens to be the first listing.
Huh.
So we know that if left to their own devices, people are not naturally going to actively label things. So you really need to build something in that at least is going to give you a default or give you some intelligence along the way to be able to properly label those.
I think a lot of companies have been using data in this way, maybe not in a security context, but want to understand something about me, for example, where I like to shop, where I happen to go, and they're using these models. There's kind of two aspects to that. One, what can we learn from that in a security perspective? And what can we do as an individual to help protect some of my privacy and figure out what I might be sharing and what might be of risk to me if I do share it? How do we tackle that problem when we talk about data in this context?
Yeah, that's actually a really it's a problem because again, we want to have those wonderful enhanced experiences as customers. We want the right content being served to us, but we also don't want to be overserved or overhandled in that way. So I think there's a real balancing act there. And the other part of it is, in different countries, and especially for large global enterprises, you're operating in different ecosystems, and the tolerance is different. And of course, many companies are contending with the upcoming data GDPR, European Union data protection and privacy regulations that are going to have an impact, and that's coming as soon as next year. But there still is a little bit of a gray area there on what some of the terms mean and what actually has to be enforced. But it's an interesting balancing act. And as you mentioned, there's such a huge amount of data that's been aggregated on all of us, if you will. And so part of it is, as an individual, we want to make sure it's handled correctly. But as security operators and people sort of monitoring for threats, there's a lot of sort of good information in there to contextualize behavior and contextualize what's happening, what's normal, what's not normal.
I think on the positive note, I have good shopping experiences, and I like that. I make it very public, and through my shopping habits, I love headphones. I buy lots of different headphones. So when I see advertisements on Facebook, for example, a lot of them are headphones. And I'm like, well, that makes sense. I know you're collecting data about me. And just today, I bought a set of headphones for the guys in the studio. It got a great deal on it that I normally wouldn't have discovered had the systems not been tracking me. But that's normal behavior for me. And I mean, I know that, and now they as Amazon and Facebook, they know that as well. When we put that in a security context, can we detect variances that help us from a security context? In other words, we know, kind of like a UBA, we know this user typically does these things. How do we detect variances? So how do you see that kind of transferring into security to make more intelligent decisions to detect those variances where a user that is maybe not into headphones goes and buys something different that could cause a red flag, for example?
Yeah, so I think we could definitely, we look for, a profile and building a profile of what we think normal is, right? And there are products out there that do that from a, Active Directory perspective. Are you, logging in at the same time? Are you doing something similar to what the rest of the people in your group do or your operational unit? So there are things out there that do that, but I think there are also really interesting products that tell us a little bit more about the connection between the human and being able to really make sure you have sort of that persistent identity or it's still that person. again, their context may be different. They may be moving from device to device, or they may be traveling, or something's different. But being able to understand that and contextualize that tells me whether I have a threat I need to respond to, or know that someone traveling that just had an issue with a piece of equipment that they had, that they're now getting a loan or something else. Those kinds of things help us have a better context for it. And the other thing, too, is inference models are another area where we're focusing some of our research. And this is looking at, again, if you knew something about blacklisted domains and the behavior of those domains, are there ways that I can start to infer relationships between other domains that may not yet be on that blacklist? So inference is a big deal to see, do I have enough stuff in common with something known bad that I would be, again, that asset or that thing may be determined to also be at risk.
Yeah, it's interesting when we start tracking that. Like when did Paul start becoming interested in headphones? Like I may have had conversations with people, and then all of a sudden my data path goes that way. How do we determine if that's normal? In other words, a domain could be totally normal, but how do we collect the data to infer that now that domain is really bad?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And we're trying to tackle some of that in our research. So there's bipartite graph analysis and other types of analysis that we'll use to look for those correlations. And they're not easy to find. I think it's easier on the human attack surface because we sort of understand behavior. We have a framework for understanding what people are doing, the many dimensions that they may be acting on. But I think it's a little bit harder when we start thinking about the IT side and assets on IT, where we think we understand the human asset.
Lisa, you used the term bipartite graph analysis. That's awesome.
Oh.
What is that? That was awesome term. That was great.
Drop the mic.
Yeah. She was hoping you wouldn't call her out.
Yeah,
on that.
exactly.
Yeah, it's good. So we have, again, we're focusing on some of the graph analytics, and this has been a space that we get really excited about. We've had a project that's been running now. We're in our 4th year of graph analytics because we love it. We have vertices, we have edges, we're not boxed in, and analyzing things lets us sort of open and close apertures very quickly on the data. We can pivot on things so quickly, which makes it fun. But the bipartite graph analysis is taking a look at the mathematical modeling around those connections. So looking at in very painful detail, we're running that in concert with Georgia Tech and their high performance computing. They have a project that they've run called Stinger, which now has been transformed to be called Hornet. It's graduated. But it's really doing very heavy graph analytic modeling, and the bipartite graph analysis is part of that.
Lisa, give us some insights as to when you're working with your team and you're talking about all these different aspects of analyzing data. Like, what are those conversations like? Like, how much fun is that? Like, you're talking about some really geeky, nerdy stuff, which is just awesome. Like, I want to be a fly on the wall when you're working with your various labs team.
You just called them geeks. They're so happy.
Exactly. It's a compliment, right?
In our field, it's a compliment, total compliment.
It is. I got it. Yeah, it is fun. And I'll tell you, the one thing that makes it fun for me is there's probably not a day that I come in and have a conversation where I'm not learning something different or getting pushed in a different direction. And for research, that's part of our goal. Because I'll tell you what, if we're thinking about things that people have solved, we're thinking about the wrong things. And Accenture invests a lot of effort and energy and resources in Accenture Labs and sort of our whole innovation architecture. But the labs part of it, for me, has been really fun. And there are a couple other really fun projects where we're kicking the tires on quantum computing and cryptography and trying to do some demystification of that. And we're looking at FPGAs and sort of what are they optimized for in security processing. And as I said, there isn't a day that you don't come in and you're not challenged. I got to go figure that out, which is great.
I love it. It's so geeky. I love it.
Yeah.
I you know that. I mean, even at home with the Amazon Echo, and the kids will be asking it questions like,
Yep.
I ask it what is pi and what's the value of pi, because I want to see how far out she can, read the number. And my wife's just kind of like rolling her eye. I mean, she's in a scientific field as well, but
Yeah.
my kids are like rolling their eyes. They're like, Dad, you're such a geek. I'm like, yeah, I know,
Yeah.
but quantum computing is interesting because we don't actually have a quantum computer to study at this point, unless you tell us otherwise, Lisa.
So we have things that are approaching it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really a matter of, again, qubits processed and error corrected qubits, which is a whole nother discussion, but we're getting there. And the challenge and the call to action is to quickly understand what that inflection point is of when it's here and how big a threat is it to our current cryptographic methods.
Right.
It's amazing that we're having conversations and how it can impact our industry and how our daily lives operate, where it's still something that has yet to actually be developed.
Yeah,
I think that's amazing.
Really cool.
Yeah. So the other part of it too is if you think about, and maybe I'm dating myself, I will. If you think about the amount of energy that went into something like a Y2K, we're probably going to approach something like that when it really comes to swapping out cryptographic methods and really looking at getting to quantum proof cryptography, right? So that's from the attack side. So you'll hear more soon from us about it, but it's one of those things we're really we're focused on because we think it's going to take a lot of energy to solve it as an industry, right?
I think that's a really good analogy, and Richard Molds from Whitewood Security was talking about that the last few times he was on the show. And I think that's a really good analogy. You're also, Lisa, you said you were working on attack surface management. What I find kind of interesting is that I think many in IT, as we talked to Pony Express earlier, we kind of think even though we don't necessarily state that we think this way, I think many of us still think in the traditional approach to IT security and the attack surface and the perimeter, protecting IP addresses and endpoints. How do we need to evolve our kind of views of the attack surface to be more effective at security in today's modern world?
Yeah, attack surface management is huge. So not only just, again, kind of being aware of what your perimeter is, knowing what your exposure is, there's so much, we don't believe there's a boundary anymore. I mean, I think most security experts would agree with this. We're pretty porous. As companies right now. And the idea is thinking very differently about containers, about application code, about services that we're running, and really getting back to that reduced set of things that we need to reduce our profiles, whether inside or outside. So we're looking at it from a really interesting perspective of containers and apps sitting in those containers as they're running, and how could you actually reduce the set of code from a binary perspective that's running, and lock that in and really end up taking a lot of the vulnerabilities off the table. And when you do that, you not only do that for sort of that instance of the application, but now future things that come out, I'm resilient to because I don't have that exposure. And so you can think about libraries and other things that you might just automatically port in initially, but you're probably not using most of that stuff. So part of that is getting better about how we think about attack surface.
I feel like we've been saying that since we've gotten into the industry. Larry and I have been in the industry for probably longer than we care to admit. But we've been saying that reducing that attack surface is so critical so that inherently you're vulnerable to the next thing. Lisa, why do you think we've kind of been somewhat loosey-goosey about our attack surface up to this point? Is it just because we want to make things work?
No, I actually think it's probably the nature of how we've set up security and IT within the organizations or your lines of business. Or security was always the group that was somehow charged with managing this whole thing and reducing attack surface, yet they didn't own the infrastructure that they were trying to protect. That's typically IT or the business or some other group that has that and is charged with a whole bunch of different metrics to go off and produce and hit the delivery and go to scale and all those wonderful production parameters. And then the cleanup on the other side is security raising their hand saying, whoa, wait a minute, we just opened up all this stuff, and now we've got to figure out how to defend it and hopefully shrink it. So I think it's a funny dynamic in how we've set it up.
I really believe, and you mentioned containers in there, I really believe that DevOps and containers and orchestration in that realm really opens up an opportunity for us to deliver a much reduced attack surface. I just went through this week. The developer team came to me and said, this package is no longer available. Do we need it? I'm like, I don't know. It was like a legacy thing we just kind of included. I'm like,
right.
Rip it out and run it through a QA process, and if it still works, push it to production. And that process is so much easier in a DevOps environment today. I feel like we're set up for success now. Do you agree with that? And can you kind of describe for our security audience the benefits there? Because I think many of us haven't kind of latched onto that newer technology yet.
Yeah, absolutely. Because even when you're thinking about these things, what business group is going to let you go in after the fact and take their application and say, no, we'll just take a little time, shrink it, we're going to clean stuff up. So you have to be in that DevOps cycle. And there are benefits to the business too, because they can throw in feature sets, they can add capability, and simplify their maintenance. So, much like we learned about, hey, if we build good code, it's easier to maintain if it's cleaner code. We learned that in the 80s, 90s? We proved it. It's a similar thing. So how do we start to think differently, not just about building good code, but being good stewards of removing the stuff we don't need and doing that in the process. So the other operational maturity that's needed here is you better have a darn good test plan. You better know all the functionality in the QA process that you need to test for, to make sure, because the rigor of that test is going to be directly proportional to the quality of what you get out, and does everything work when you're out in production. But again, the DevOps enables a fast cycle time on that. So there's the ability to correct, or as you add new features to the app, maybe I do need different things in the container that I have to add again. But each time going through that cycle, and if we make it fast enough, and if we make it frictionless, if you will, as much as we can for the business, to go through that testing and quickly repackage things and shrink it, it's a win-win.
Yeah, I love the term you used there of friction, and Michael Santarcangelo talks about that a lot in communications, and it really does kind of contextualize a lot of the problems I think we have in security today, as we've kind of been you must do that or not do that, aspect of the organization, but that creates friction. And if we have a much better process, we can remove some of that friction and move forward much more quickly. And I think that's some of the advantage of DevOps. What in your assessment, Lisa? Why haven't more enterprises adopted this model? And what are some of the challenges we need to overcome to adopt a much cleaner DevOps and release cycle when we're developing applications?
Yeah, I think there's been this historic investment in development teams and a mindset where we're going to build this epic thing and launch and transform, and then it's going to run for years. That doesn't exist now. I mean, so if we think about it from the business side of things, we know the pace of change we need to keep up with, yet we still haven't shaken that model. Where we need to think about the DevOps model, the factories, the quick cycling on things, and not these epic campaigns to launch an enormous release of something. There's too much that changes along the way, and if we keep learning those lessons and painfully learn those lessons, that we really need to break this up and really break it up into a DevOps model where we're doing quicker iterations on things, on code, and not going for these releases that we had in 2000, where let's push some huge enormous thing out. Let's field a system in full, where we really need to get into capabilities, feature sets, and really getting those out quickly.
Lisa, are there other things that you're working on in your role in the labs portion of Accenture that you wanted to make our audience aware of?
Yeah, so we're doing a lot in IoT, and I heard you had fun with the Raspberry Pi.
Paul has way too much fun with
Way too
Raspberry
much fun.
Pis.
Yeah.
So do I.
I just
So do I.
remember you were cooking something, right? It got hot.
Yes, yeah. It's actually integral to our process here at Security Weekly. We use Raspberry Pis. Just last week or the week prior, Kyle, one of our software engineers, like built this thing out of wood to house like 8 Raspberry Pis, and we're ordering these custom cables to power them. So yeah, we love Raspberry Pis.
That sounds like a campfire.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yes.
Pretty much.
Yes. Did you get your IoT button working yet?
Not yet. I have it. Yep.
So last week I gave Paul one of the Amazon AWS IoT buttons so he can press it, and every time he presses it, it orders an Amazon a Pi. Yeah, that one. Yeah, press the Amazon AWS button for a Pi.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I have a researcher who has one of those because they keep coming in. Yeah, but
great.
we are doing a lot on the IoT space, and it's a really interesting area for us because it's different telemetry, different log information that will come where we still need the situational awareness. So how do we do all the things we know and love on the IT side where we have sort of rigor to security logging and event logging? How do we get that equivalent or the same quality of insight out of a very different set of data? And so that's one of the challenges we've been working on to get to, even knowing in the kill chain, where are you based on the type of events and the nature of the things that you're seeing, and how do you integrate that with Splunk and Palo Alto and other tools, and then really start to use I'll say it, AI, on top of it to accelerate your insights. So that's another really fun area. And the other thing, and it was released in Wired magazine today, Microsoft has just announced a really exciting initiative around consumer IoT, which we're also excited about because it is something that should really transform how consumer goods are coming to the market and really enable them to have security. Yeah.
Really?
It is exciting. I'm excited about it.
Wired.com. Here I come.
Lisa, one of the problems.
Yeah, seriously.
One of the problems we were talking about today was that many people who are defending enterprises today look at IoT security or an insecurity and say, well, it's not my problem. Like, that's a home user's problem. It's not really in the enterprise. What's your assessment of how large the problem is in enterprises today when we use the term IoT security?
Mirai botnet.
Yeah.
Funny, I seem to remember that coming up on our webcast.
Yeah.
And multiple iterations of it, right?
Yeah, it kind of slowed things down a little bit here on the East Coast. Yeah, it's noise, right? But it's noise that if we remember what noise can do and disruption and denial of service, we have to pay attention to it. And one of the other trends that we're seeing is that, CISOs are not only contemplating sort of the IT security of it and CSOs sort of contemplate the physical, but now they're dealing with smart infrastructure in buildings, so sensors and other devices in buildings. So all of them are getting kind of cross-training in this operational IoT space that they now have to manage and understand how that is vulnerable. So I don't think we can step away from it gracefully, even if you said, okay, consumer devices, I'm going to keep them off my network or somehow shield myself from them. But I think that's a short-sighted approach, as we saw.
Yeah, no, I agree and I gave examples of not just today, but years ago, consulting with groups within an organization that were like, oh yeah, we're implementing building automation. And now I think about it today, that's what we're terming as IoT. And it's been in enterprises for several years now, maybe even decades. We're just calling it something different. And I think it's really one of those things, much like Active Directory security, which we're going to talk about next. It's one of those things that not enough people recognize that it's a problem. And we really need to raise awareness. I think that it is a huge problem.
Yeah, and I think we're going to see with consumer devices, especially, there's teddy bears that frighten us because they're processing kids' data on the cloud. There's all kinds of things with, security cameras, smart door locks, all the things that start to affect us at home, we quickly have a context for now appreciating what that vulnerability could mean, right? What does it mean when someone co-ops your house? That's not a good thing.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because over time in my home, it's more like Star Trek, as I referenced earlier, where I can give voice commands to control the things in my house. And like just yesterday, I was walking around. I'm like, well, I kind of do feel like I just turned off all my Christmas lights when I was standing in my garage with a voice command. And then, I activated other things. I turned off the TV with a voice command. I'm like, really? Like I am. And that's going to trickle. I think what Lisa was saying, that's going to trickle into the enterprise, because there are going to be technology adoptions that make the business operate more efficiently, and those are going to trickle in from the consumer side. And I think that's a really good kind of aspect of this whole security thing.
Alexa, volume up.
Yes.
Christmas lights off.
Yes.
Alexa, volume up.
My Christmas tree is, I think, labeled in my voice command as like couch lamp or something.
Alexa, couch lamp on.
Yeah, so I'll like turn the couch lamp on. I'm like, my wife's like, you just turned off the Christmas tree. I'm like, damn it.
Alexa, couch lamp off.
So, Lisa, what's it like to work at Accenture? I know Accenture is very much hiring talented folks today. What's it like to work there at Accenture?
Oh my gosh, well, as I shared, I think I have one of the funnest jobs at Accenture. So
No, they're all the
we're hiring
funnest
in
jobs.
labs. Yeah. No, mine's better. Yeah, it is. And one of the things that's really exciting is, and I've worked at a number of companies. I've had a long career, which has been great. But the ability to work with global companies, and global companies that are really looking at transforming, at really what that value is. And so that's been so much fun to have access to those companies, to be able to co-innovate with them from a research perspective, not just sort of all the wonderful delivery that Accenture does, but that's been great. And one of the other things I've been privileged to do is to open up another cybersecurity lab in Herzliya, Israel. And we did that because, of course, Israel is a tremendous center of gravity.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
For information security. So to us, it just made sense. So that's been a lot of fun, again, being a part of that ecosystem and building up that research presence there. And it's just been so rewarding.
I'm listening to you tonight, Lisa, and I want to come work for Accenture Labs. And I'm sure there's many listening that are like, this sounds like a really great thing. Like, what types of people and roles are you looking for in Accenture Labs?
Oh my gosh, that's a great question. So Accenture Security at Large, who's sort of my downstream partner, we're looking for all kinds of skills. And really what powers us is diverse thinking. So it's people that think about solving problems differently. And usually that's very different people. Because if we all looked and thought the same and came from the same backgrounds,
It'd be really boring.
You're probably getting, it would be a snoozer. It would not be exciting. You wouldn't get the innovation. You wouldn't get the critical thinking. So we are looking, we think about cybersecurity, but we're looking for people that are data scientists, the people that are in IT, people that understand risk. And privacy and other things. So it's not just the hardcore sort of computer science and engineering people, of which I am, but it's really looking at sort of that diversity of skill, because we've got big problems to solve that require lots of diverse thinking. So that's across Accenture, but Accenture Security is very interested in folks that have that interest and excitement and passion for the mission, which we have.
No, and I think that's great. I think a lot of people that are looking to advance their career path might be thinking, oh, well, I'm not a security person. I don't belong in a security company.
Yeah.
But what Lisa just said was, hey, we're looking for people from diverse backgrounds that think differently. And that doesn't necessarily mean you've got 10 years of security experience. It means you come from a diverse background and have some skills that could be applicable to Accenture. So that's a good message to send to our audience, I think. Yeah.
Great.
Lisa, I have just 5 ridiculous, silly questions for you. No one's really ready to answer them, but are you ready to answer 5 questions with Security Weekly?
I'll do my best.
Okay. We ask these of all of our guests, so here we go. 3 words to describe yourself.
Happy, excited, futurist.
If you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
Oh, throwing knives.
If you wrote a book about yourself, what would the title be?
Oh my goodness. A journey.
In the popular game of Ask Grabby Grabby, do you prefer to go first or second?
I need the rules to the game first.
We play by the American rules here.
The
but in
American
Europe-
rules, not yet. It's
Yeah,
popular
European
in
rules are a
Europe,
little different.
but we have our own rules. And I stole that question from this really kind of esoteric TV show. If you remember, it was on for a short period of time. It was called Bully Beatdown.
Oh,
And
jeez.
that's where I got the question from.
Oh no.
You can pass. It's totally fine. It's,
I really don't even know how to answer that one.
Neither do we.
neither do we. Yeah. Lisa, choose 2 celebrities to be your parents.
Alive, dead, fictional, or otherwise.
Ooh.
This is the thinker. We put this one last week. We have time to like fill time so that you
Well,
can think about. Go ahead, Lisa.
No, I had Shatner, William Shatner.
Ah,
There you
yes.
go.
It's
There's
great.
one. I mean,
Oh,
yeah,
yes.
seriously.
I love
Isabella
that
Rossellini.
answer. Sorry, William Shatner and who, I apologize.
Isabella Rossellini.
Very nice.
Oh.
Very nice. Lisa, thank you so much for appearing on Pulse Security Weekly. It was wonderful having you. I'm so glad you could make the time to sit with us this evening.
Thank you guys so much. This is a lot of fun.
Thanks
Thanks,
so
Lisa.
much.
With that, we can take a short break, come back with our technical segment, so stay tuned.